there. I'm Gary Parrish. Welcome back to the Eye on College Basketball Podcast, where we sometimes discuss camel fighting, dodo birds, and leaky black. Matt Norlander is here with me, and we're going to be here on CBS Sports Network for the next hour discussing some of the biggest topics in the sport. And the place to start is with top-ranked Auburn, which is now 18-1 overall, 6-0 in the SEC, unanimous number one in the AP poll. Norlander, before I ask you a philosophical question about Auburn and the polls, let me just get your thoughts on the 18-1 team that Bruce Pearl has built at Auburn that seems very capable of possibly bringing that school its first national championship in the sport of men's basketball.
Yeah, as we've crossed the halfway point of the season, great to see a GP, and Auburn remains the number one team. It's held this position for more than a month, and really, in the eyes of you and I, for the most part, as we followed what this team did back in November. I was there. I saw them in person at the Maui Invitational, where they won that event. It's been impressive to see how they've held this position in the toughest conference and the best conference in the country, when it would have been entirely reasonable for a number of factors for that not to have been the case. But the Janai Broome ankle injury only wound up keeping him out for 2 games. They had that week-long break, which really benefited them, and now they're 18-1. I did watch a good portion of that game over the weekend when they were able to eke out a clutch win at home in an ugly game where Tennessee obviously had some spots and some opportunities and really probably was pacing toward more winning that game than not. But Auburn got the game on its home floor. It wins ugly, and we've seen it do a number of ways. So this is still the number one team in offense per possession in the country, and it's been extremely impressive to see what they've done. They're going to lose again. I'm highly confident in that, but they only have one loss, and it's at Duke. It's a completely reasonable loss, only by 6 points, and now they're staring ahead at 4 of their next 6 being on the road. But it's amazing to see what Auburn has done, and you're talking to a guy who very much got this wrong in the preseason when Auburn was a very understandably trendy preseason top 10 pick. I actually faded that. I thought they might be good, but not great. I didn't have them inside my top 25, and that was among my bigger misses in recent history. But it's been awesome to see what they've done, and to have Broome back when he's not really 100% yet. He wanted to be back. He wanted to be in that game, and they needed him. If Broome was not playing against Tennessee would have won. He was there and gave reinforcement as to why, as we talked on the show on CBS Sports Network last week, it's a two-man race for National Player of the Year right now, with Cooper Flagg maybe just barely ahead of Broome.
I have called Auburn's start one of the best 19-game starts in recent history. And I know that sounds hyperbolic, but when you dive into the numbers, it's really not. They've been amazing. Amazing without context, but amazing within the context of what the rest of the sport is doing. Auburn is 18-1 overall, 11-1 in quadrant 1. Nobody else in the entire country has 11 quadrant 1 victories, or 10, or 9. Only Oregon has 8. Nobody else has more than 6 besides Oregon and Auburn. So Auburn has 3 more quadrant 1 wins than everybody else in the country, and 5 more than everybody else but Oregon. So here's my question for you. Have we reached the point where Auburn could, say, lose tomorrow night at LSU? It would be a quadrant 1 loss based on current projections. Could Auburn lose that game and on Thursday morning reasonably just keep Auburn at number 1 in the top 25-1, and then on the subsequent Monday, AP voters just keep Auburn number 1, even with a loss, even if Duke doesn't lose at all this week?
No, but what you do is different than what AP voters do, in my opinion. So, GP, you're, as you know, a reminder to our viewers on CBS Sports Network, Parrish's rankings are much more resume-based and in totality. And so in that regard, another way of framing this is, if we were to take a bracketology forecast right now, Auburn is clearly the number 1 overall seed. Could Auburn afford to lose a game, even 2 games, and not lose that ranking? And it absolutely could. I mean, it's so far ahead that it can do that. If Duke does not lose, and we'll get to Duke's win over NC State a little bit later on the show, but if Duke doesn't lose to UNC on Saturday, and Auburn were to lose between now and next Monday, like they play at LSU, and they've got a road game against Ole Miss coming up this Saturday as well. Duke would usurp Auburn in the AP top 25. Not saying necessarily it outright should or deserves to, based on overall resume, but with the way the AP rankings work, Duke would jump to number one at that point because Auburn would have taken a loss. Doesn't mean Duke would necessarily be better than Auburn, although I will note that Duke was number one in KenPom and dropped to number 3 overnight because the win at home against NC State was much closer than it was forecast to be. And so now Auburn, as we talk here on Tuesday afternoon, is the number one team at KenPom, the number one team in the AP Top 25. But from a resume perspective, Auburn has so much cushion at this point that it would really take a collapse for the Tigers not to wind up with the number one seed, the likes of which that we've been given zero evidence of happening. So yeah, Bruce Pearl's team is on track here to make program history with its best seeding ever and potentially its best record ever.
You might be right that if Auburn loses the game this week and Duke doesn't, Duke would move to number one in the AP poll. I would argue against it. I don't think it would be right, but I can't control AP voters and what they'll do. I can only make fun of them when they do stupid stuff, but I can't control what they do. But I do think it would be, maybe stupid's too harsh, but wrong, just wrong to have somebody other than Auburn.
There's that. Now, Duke had the home game in this scenario, but they also have the home win over Auburn as well. So I don't know if it's necessarily wrong. Also, AP ranking in general, like it for a program like Duke, whether you're number one or not, it really doesn't mean a whole ton of a lot here. But they do have the head-to-head win over Auburn. That arrow in the quiver, which I think could be also another factor.
It should be a factor, but I don't think it's enough to offset the dramatic differences in the bodies of work. I guess I'd put it this way. I look at Auburn right now as like a golfer on the back nine that's got like a 3-shot lead over the field. So let's say Auburn's a golfer, play along, if you will. And they're matched up with somebody who's 3 shots behind them, tied for second in the field. And Auburn as a golfer bogeys the next hole. And the person Auburn's playing with pars the next hole. The person would still be 2 shots back of Auburn because Auburn has created a cushion. And that's the way I look at this, where we are in the season now. They've created so much of a cushion over Duke and everybody else. I genuinely believe they could lose Wednesday at LSU or this weekend at Ole Miss and still have undeniably the best body of work in the sport and should still be respected that way with a 1 beside their name. How about this? I think Jerry Palm would agree with me. He, of course, does the brackets at CBSSports.com. If Auburn loses on Wednesday night and he updates his bracket on Thursday morning, I think he will still tell you Auburn should be the number 1 overall seed. And I'm at the point where I believe that's the way I'll treat the top 25 and 1. Even with a loss on Wednesday, I'll probably have Auburn number 1 on Thursday morning, unless, of course, they lose by 50 billion or Janai Broome gets hurt again. We'll see. But just a loss at LSU, the resume is still so good that it should be respected in that way, I believe.
Yeah, I agree with that on the resume. But AP voters treat it more like a power ranking, like a hot list, like what teams are trending. So if they're going to lose and Duke doesn't, like Duke will jump. But we'll see if Duke can, again, get past UNC, NC State, give them a real scare. But that's for later in the show.
When we come back, we'll turn our attention to Florida, where the Title IX investigation into allegations made against Florida coach Todd Golden has been completed. The investigation uncovered no evidence of Title IX violations, according to Florida officials. We'll discuss what that means and what it doesn't mean. We'll do that next. This is the Eye on College Basketball Podcast. We're on CBS Sports Network. Welcome back to the Eye on College Basketball Podcast on CBS Sports Network. I'm Gary Parrish. That's Matt Norlander. Florida has been great this season, 18-2 overall, 5th in the AP poll, but the season has had a cloud hanging above it, specifically a Title IX investigation into Coach Todd Golden after some serious allegations were made against him by multiple women. On Monday, Florida officials said its Title IX investigation is completed. They found no evidence of Title IX violations by Todd Golden. He'll continue coaching the Gators, same as he has been. Norlander, you handled the headline at CBSSports.com. What exactly does this mean and not mean for Todd Golden going forward?
Well, it means Todd Golden will keep his job. He was never suspended when this story broke. And we knew about this story because the Independent Alligator, the student-run newspaper at the University of Florida, broke this story back in the first week of the season. Now, this was a Title IX investigation. Typically, those kind of investigations are held private in the benefit and out of a courtesy to all involved parties. That wasn't the case here because of some reporting that broke the story. There's still another Title IX investigation going on right now with Florida's program, because Torian Green, who of course famously played on the 06 and 07 national title winning teams under Billy Donovan, he has been a staff member the past couple of years at Florida, but his Title IX investigation was also exposed to public disclosure by a report from ESPN.com earlier this month, which then provoked Todd Golden to express his extreme disappointment over the fact that these things became public when they're supposed to not be. Regardless of that fact, Green has not been suspended, just as Golden wasn't, and we await to see what happens with his specific case, which was completely unrelated to this case, but it goes to what you just mentioned before, GP, where there has been a lot of uncertainty and certainly some dark clouds hanging over Florida's program. The release that came yesterday, there were a number of statements that came. I mean, Golden's lawyer, the university's athletic association, the university itself, which gave a statement separate from effectively the athletic department, then Golden himself put four statements came out. I'm not going to read them all, but when I reached out to the school and not the athletic department for the comment, here's what it was. Quote, "The University of Florida takes these matters seriously and works deliberately to ensure that due process is upheld for everyone. After a thorough investigation that included dozens of interviews over the past months, the University of Florida has found no evidence that Todd Golden violated Title IX. The Title IX office has closed its investigation," end quote. The allegations included claims of sexual harassment, sexual exploitation, stalking, unusual behavior on social media. But Golden has been cleared. He did release a statement on Monday that included the quote, "The last several months have been a challenge for me and my family while this process dragged on. We asked for the public to allow the process to work through its conclusion and not rush to judgment based on allegations. The UAA and so many at the university have been tremendously supportive. My family and I are extremely grateful," end quote. So he has been cleared of this. Golden specifically, I have to note, did not ever at any point deny the allegations. Now, a lot of this lawyers can get involved, and obviously we're heavily in determining what should and should not be revealed publicly on that. But they went through a thorough Title IX investigation and concluded that within the purview of the university's gender equity policy, there was no evidence to corroborate the allegations. And the reason why this is a big story was because the nature of the inquiry became public. I mean, speaking entirely hypothetically, like maybe there's a chance right now there's a sitting head coach at another school right now going through a Title IX investigation that nobody has any idea of because it hasn't been publicly disclosed. So that program and that coach hasn't been subject to a lot of scrutiny and everything that comes with that. That was not the case here with Florida. Golden will continue to coach. This just so happens to be going alongside of Florida having unexpectedly its best season in more than a decade.
Obviously, it's important to point out the terminology is specific for a reason. No evidence of Title IX violations doesn't necessarily equate to no evidence of wrongdoing or what some might refer to as inappropriate behavior. But the facts are the facts. The Title IX investigation is over. Do we believe this is over? Like we just never hear about this again? Or is there a scenario where it's day one of the SEC tournament and two women are sitting down with 60 Minutes or the equivalent of 60 Minutes and telling their version of events with the Florida men's basketball coach?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if to the scenario you're laying out there, GP. I don't know if that's going to happen or not. But this being attached to Golden, it certainly seems like something that will, at least for the near term of the future, will be something that's he's affiliated with. Now, he was cleared in this specific investigation, and we have to give credence to that, generally speaking. The fact that he was also never suspended by the university throughout all of this really indicated, in the ensuing weeks after the story broke, the fact that there was no discipline seemed to foreshadow that this would be the end result here. But it may still be something that could come up again, and certainly something that is attached to him. Now, if he were truly innocent of all this stuff and you could make any kind of accusation against him and he was entirely clear, like that's not how we should be trying to operate as a society. But I do believe that for the most part, I think it's more likely than not that this will be behind him, because as far as Florida's concerned, there was nothing there. And I completely understand the fact that this comes out. I mean, there's a lot of cynical people that are like, oh, well, they're 18-2. What if they were 10-10 and that kind of thing? I completely understand where people are coming from with that. But a reminder to our listeners and viewers that these investigations very specifically and intentionally operate outside of the realm of the athletic department, and basically anyone attached to having any kind of working relationship, be it subordinates or superiors or anything with the athletic department, the basketball program, Todd Golden specifically. The people that take on these Title IX cases often have very extensive legal backgrounds. And as the school said, they went through a very thorough process with a lot of interviews over the past few months. And so he has been cleared. We wait and see on the timeline as it pertains to Torian Green, who, again, those allegations specifically with him and allegedly another employee at the University of Florida, I believe within the athletic department, that is a separate matter altogether, but he has not been suspended.
Like I said, the Gators are 18-2 overall. I've got them fourth in my top 25-1. Little surprised that all of this didn't provide more of a distraction that showed up on the court, if only because human nature suggests that it could have, and it just didn't. I give them credit for that. Those young men in that basketball program were able to stay focused, and Todd and his staff were able to, keep everybody engaged and in a place where they could compete at the top of the best league in the country. How good are they? I know that early in the season, they didn't have the substance to the resume to justify a top 5 ranking, but we're past that point now. They've shown themselves to clearly be one of the best teams in the country. But do you consider Florida in the SEC a peer of, say, Auburn and Alabama?
I do. At this point, I think everything we see on the floor, in addition to the data that backs it up, Florida is an SEC contender. Florida is capable of winning the SEC regular season championship, winning the SEC tournament. It is right there with Alabama and Tennessee. In my opinion, there are really 4 teams now that have a realistic hope of being a number 1 seed, barring, if Kentucky were to win tonight, and we can reassess that then, but they're going to be shorthanded, so we'll see on that. I think Florida, Tennessee, Auburn, and Alabama are the 4 teams in the SEC that have pragmatic sights set on getting on that top line, and I do think they are really good. Walter Clayton Jr., he'd be an All-American on my ballot, not necessarily first team. I don't think he hasn't been at that level so far this season, but second or third team for sure. And then he's playing alongside Will Richard and Elijah Martin. They've got it hasn't just been those 3, but that 3-headed backcourt wing attack, and the compliments with Alex Condon. It's been extremely impressive, and Florida was expected to be good this season. It seemed as though they were going to be well on their way to getting another NCAA tournament bid. They got one last season, but this has been way beyond what people expected. And when we talk about what the SEC is and how strong it has been, it's been because, Florida has been, 1 or 2 notches above what we thought. Georgia has been a notch above what we thought. Mississippi State and Ole Miss have been a notch above what we thought, in addition to Auburn being the best team in the country, and Kentucky, although it's taken on some losses and could get a little bump here in the back half. All these teams have been overachieving to a certain extent, and Florida, I don't want to say it's been an ultra overachieving team, but pretty much no one had the Gators as a top 5 level team, and maybe the same amount didn't think they'd be a top 10 team, and they are that. I think they are for real, and I think they are good enough to win a national championship.
When we come back, before we look ahead, want to look back to last night, Monday night, because there was a couple of interesting developments in the sport. Cooper Flagg got 28 points in Duke's win over NC State. And then Caleb Love, he flipped an Arizona loss into an Arizona win with an incredible shot at the end of regulation. We'll discuss both next. Eye on College Basketball Podcast. We're on CBS Sports Network. Welcome back to the Eye on College Basketball Podcast on CBS Sports Network. It was a fun Monday night in the sport last night. Let's start with the earlier game that made headlines. Final score, number 2 Duke, 74, NC State 64. Cooper Flagg, don't get bored with it just because it's getting normal. 28 points, 7 rebounds, 3 assists. He's now averaging 19.9 points, 8.0 rebounds, 4.1 assists, 1.5 steals, 1.2 blocks per game. He is leading Duke, or is at least the co-leader at Duke, in every one of those categories. Norlander, I know you had your eyeballs on that game last night. What'd you make of Cooper Flagg's latest big performance?
Yeah, a lot to get to here with this. By the way, you mentioned how he leads in all 5 categories. Had this earlier in January in my court report, which runs every Wednesday. If he continues to lead Duke in all 5 major statistical categories, he will join Ben Simmons as the only freshman to ever do that.
I would never want to join
pretty
Ben.
impressive at the high major level specifically.
Would you argue that he should try not to do this just so he doesn't have to join Ben Simmons? I would actually argue he should now let Malawach lead the team in blocks. I think you should let Malawach. His future looks bright,
although it is interesting to think back on Ben Simmons' time at LSU and how disappointing that team was. Really how widespread the coverage of Ben Simmons was despite the disappointments there. And Flagg he's in that territory. In fact, I saw Rush the Court, who does a good job covering college hoops, mention the fact that Flagg went for at least 20.7 boards and 3 assists last night. He's now done that 6 times and 3 blocks. He's done that 6 times so far this season. The only other guys to do that in their freshman seasons recently were Durant and Zion Williamson at that level, exactly 6. Brandon Miller did it 7 times. RJ Barrett did it 11. Ben Simmons did it 13 times. And to think back, Ben Simmons had such a disappointing freshman season, and then it kind of it forebode to a certain level in the NBA. Anyway, the game was nuts. Flagg continues to be awesome. He's in January specifically. He's averaging more than 25 points, 7.5 rebounds, and 5 assists. They would have lost the game if he wasn't on the floor. This game had almost everything. Kaman Malawach vomited at one point, and they used approximately 2,000 towels to clean it up. Shouts to the managers because that was so gross. Thankfully, we found out after the fact that one of the students in one of the crazies had passed out, and you had the uncomfortable scene of security, bringing her out of the arena when she had passed out. Her body was limp, but she's okay, thankfully. But that happened. You had Con Knippel saving his teammate Tyrese Proctor from going out of bounds by literally grabbing his leg and pulling him back in. All while NC State, it got up by 12 in the first half. It was able to sustain the game being close even after some big Duke swings and some big Duke runs and some huge buckets. I mean, Flagg has gotten so much better with his perimeter shot in the past 6 weeks. I'm curious to see if that sticks moving forward. But credit to NC State for not playing scared. This program obviously beat Duke last season in the ACC tournament and the NCAA tournament en route to that Final Four. And Shire has said this as of late. On a certain level, while he doesn't want to see his team get caught in a game for the first 38 minutes where the game is really in doubt and they're facing double-digit deficits to teams that are sub 500 more than halfway through the season, to be in that spot does benefit you. Like they got a big punchback from Wake Forest over the weekend on the road, and they were able to win that game, and Flagg was obviously a huge factor in that as well. So they are getting some tight games in ACC play. They're probably better for it. It's reinforcing why I'm pretty confident Duke is going to lose at least once, if not twice, in ACC play, even though they have the talent, GP, and the coaching to run the table. I just don't think that's going to happen. We'll see what North Carolina can provide this weekend. But yeah, super interesting game. Kind of went into it wondering, will this be a Duke 25-point runaway? And it was not that. NC State got off to a big start. Dontrez Styles, former North Carolina player, played well. And then credit to Trey Parker. He's a freshman, and he was not scared in this game. He had 15 points. He played well, but Duke ultimately walks away with a 74-64 win. It was not a 10-point game. I mean, they really won a game that was 4 or 5 points at most, but final score is what it is, and Flagg was awesome again.
On the young woman who had to be removed from the student section, I don't want to use it as a place to say things like, and maybe now it's time to reevaluate what Cameron Indoor Stadium is one of the best college basketball environments we have, if not the best. That student section is a part of it. But I will say, you and I have both been in that arena, sat right in front of that student section. They are on top of you and on top of each other. And it's unsurprising to me that every once in a while it could lead to something like this, because it's a pretty jam-packed, intense, and sometimes hot situation.
I mean, that building and in that area, yeah, you got all that body heat. Yeah, it can get really, really hot. So just reminder, seriously, hydrate and don't overlayer, because it can get really, really intense there. And yeah, I think that situation happened, I want to say, in real time, less than 3 minutes after they cleaned up the vomit from Malawach, who apparently just downed too much Gatorade. You've been there, Parrish, of course. You swig one too many Gatorades. The next thing you know, you're just vomiting everywhere. If this was the pod for YouTube, I might, and we had a little more time to really stretch out, I'd want to know what your most inconvenient spot you've ever vomited at was. But we'll save that. We'll save that for another show. Can we? Unless you got more thoughts on Duke, can we get to the insanity that we were both watching well after midnight on the East Coast last night when Arizona flipped a loss into a win in a way that I don't want to say I've never seen that happen, but it is so rare for a team to win the way that Arizona won, especially against such a huge opponent.
I have vomited inside Bud Walton Arena during an Arkansas basketball game, but I'll give you that story another day. I'm in New York, as you know. I'll be in studio tonight, CBS Sports Network, and I went to the Knicks-Grizzlies game last night at the Garden, but was able to get back into my hotel room in time to turn on Iowa State, Arizona. And, buddy, you talk about flipping a loss into a win. You won't see many more dramatic than that. For folks who don't understand, Arizona was down 3 points at the end of regulation, inbounding underneath their own basket. Caleb Love catches the ball so deep in his own backcourt that Fran Fraschilla at ESPN, who is terrific, the best, but immediately spots where Caleb Love catches the ball and says, it's too far. Like, caught it too far away. Game's over. You know what happened next? He banged it home. They get to overtime. Then he knocks down 2 more threes in overtime. Outscored Iowa State 8-4 by himself in the extra period. And this all happens after he started the game 1 of 10 from 3. He's 1 of 10 from 3. Then he launches from well beyond half court, knocks that one down, then gets 2 more in the extra period. As I tweeted last night, if your grandkids are ever one day talking to you about the Caleb Love experience, and I'm not even sure why they would. It would be a weird conversation, I admit. It would just be, I would wonder, what are my grandkids up to where they're asking me about Caleb Love? But just play along. If they ever did that, you'd say, oh, man, he was something else. And you might show them last night's game as the full Caleb Love experience because we got all the inefficiency, all the missed shots, but then he quite literally went out and won it for him when it was time to win it.
So much from this game. So even, and this is going to get forgotten, maybe it's already forgotten after the fact by everyone that's not an Arizona or Iowa State fan, but the free throw situation in the preceding possessions that led it to that point. You know, Henry Visar missed a shot. Then Joshua Jefferson didn't miss the shot. He makes the foul shot, allowing Arizona to try and set up something. And then it's still a desperation play. Otzelberger got asked afterward, you know, why foul there? And he, you know, why not foul there? I mean, you are going to take a guy shooting from beyond half court every single time as opposed to fouling him on the off chance you can actually foul up 3 and still lose, which is still obviously a probability out there. And speaking of probabilities, the Big 12 has had 2 insane comebacks over the past few nights. The Houston 2-time escape in Fog Allen Fieldhouse was ridiculous. And now that was 0.4%, according to Ken Palm. And then Arizona, at the moment that they were down 3 on the inbounds pass before Love shot it, it was a 1.9% chance to win the game. Caleb Love said afterward, best moment of my life, and also said, quote, you hit a shot like that, you got to win in overtime. There's no way we losing, end quote. I have to share a great lead from Bruce Pascoe, who's longtime beat writer for Arizona Sports of the Arizona Daily Star. His story, his gamer on this started like this, quote, teetering in extreme since he was named a preseason All-American last fall, alternatively torrid or frigid from 3-point range in any given game, Caleb Love condensed it all into one memorable night at McHale Center on Monday, end quote. That's how you write a lead, folks, and it's absolutely true. I want to say that was a 55-foot prayer that got him to overtime. You mentioned he had a couple more triples. He finished with the game-high 22 points. Wasn't just him, but Caleb Love is a fascinating player. He can win you games. He can lose you games. The fact that he said that shot was the best moment of his life. We're talking about a guy that hit a 3 that ended Mike Krzyzewski's coaching career in the Final Four. It's Parrish. It's just incredible. I find him to be an irresistible player from a storytelling perspective. But it wasn't just him. Toby Owaka was tremendous in this game and came up huge. 17 points, 12 rebounds. Even Carter Bryant, the freshman, he continues to emerge. Arizona was really good on defense. And, you know, the stunning thing about the result, Parrish, and I want to dive in just a little bit about what Arizona's done here before we got to take a commercial break, is it was the first time since 1979, that Arizona won at home against a top 5 opponent while also being unranked. It had been a long time since they beat a really good team when they didn't have a number next to their name in that building. Taman Lipsey had a solid night. Keyshawn Gilbert had a solid night. Curtis Jones, noticeably, he had played so well for Iowa State recently. Just 8 points. So no shame in the loss for Iowa State. To me, it's more about Arizona. This was the most disappointing team through the first 5 weeks of the season. And since then, they've completely changed everything around. They are now ahead of Iowa State in the Big 12 standings. This is an 8-1 team in league play. Only loss, understandable, although a quasi blowout at Texas Tech. But just one loss since December 14th. Where do you land right now on Tommy Lloyd's team, which could have easily and should have easily taken a home loss, an understandable one, but they didn't do that. They have one defeat since falling to UCLA on December 14th, and seems to be a team that really can be a factor in the Big 12 and might have entirely changed the season over the course of the past month.
Well, they're clearly not what they looked like they were. I mean, they started 4-5. You know, I was joking with our colleague Wally Zerbiak, and he was like, "You were real down on Arizona early." I'm like, "Why? They were 4-5." You know, like most teams that are 4-5 don't bounce back in this.
Well,
way.
he loves doing this after the fact. It's like if you go back in context of what we were talking about when we were talking about it, it made sense.
It made sense at the time, but hey, they've turned it around. They've won 10 of their past 11. I seriously considered putting them back into the top 25-1 on Tuesday morning. I couldn't quite get them there based on resume stuff. I just don't think it's one of the 26 best resumes in the country, but it might be 28th or 29th or 30th. And it's obviously subjective. If somebody wanted to rank Arizona right now, you've got all the ammo you need to do it. I chose not to, but it's not because I don't think that this is really suddenly a Big 12 contender and a team that if we were wondering a couple of months ago what it was actually going to look like, it's starting to come into form, and now it's looking like more or less what we thought Arizona was going to look like in the preseason, which is every other Tommy Lloyd team, elite. He's never had a bad team. It looked like this season he might early through 9 games, but now they've won 10 of 11. They're fine. As for the criticism, if it even exists, of Iowa State not choosing to foul up 3 there, that's silly. That's not even a question that should be asked. Foul up 3 is a thing, but it's not a thing when the circumstances are a low percentage 3-point shooter who's 1 of 10 from 55 feet. I mean, he was 1 of 10 from 3, from 23 feet. All right. We're going to give him the 55-footer every time and live with the result. It happened to go in. It created a incredible moment, but it's not something that Iowa State should have handled any differently. The idea that Fran Fraschilla said when he caught the ball, he's too far away, this game is over, suggests that Iowa State played it well. They forced him to catch it far away from the basket, and they were willing to live with a 55-footer. He made it. Awesome moment, but no criticism of Iowa State. I still got the Cyclones ranked 5th in the top 25-1. When we come back, want to look ahead to the weekend where there will be better games than Arkansas at Kentucky, but I don't think there's going to be a better scene. John Calipari's first game back at UK since leaving the program after 15 years. What's it going to sound like inside Rupp Arena? What's it going to look like inside Rupp Arena? We'll discuss that next. The Allen College Basketball Podcast, CBS Sports Network. Welcome back to the Allen College Basketball Podcast on CBS Sports Network. There will be bigger games on this weekend's schedule than Arkansas at Kentucky, but I don't think there's going to be a more interesting scene in college basketball, and maybe not in any sport in America, than the scene we're going to have on Saturday when Arkansas visits Kentucky. It will, of course, be John Calipari's first trip back to Rupp Arena as the visiting coach after he left the program following last season after 15 years. Norlander, 2 questions. I think they can be answered different ways. How do you think John Calipari is going to be treated inside Rupp Arena this weekend? And how do you think John Calipari should be treated inside Rupp Arena this weekend?
I think the Kentucky fan base will, for the most part, treat him well. I don't think you're going to get more than a smattering of boos and jeers. What's interesting is Kentucky's got a game, and we'll get to this in the next segment, but they've got a tough game upcoming here. Arkansas does not play again until Saturday, and both these teams could enter this matchup in places where, neither fan base wanted to be. Arkansas for sure. I mean, Arkansas has lost 6 of 7. It's got 1 win in the league, and John Calipari is not bringing in a team that anyone thought he would be bringing in to Rupp Arena as recently as 2 months ago. Just, Arkansas is not remotely an NCAA tournament team. It's one of the biggest letdowns in the country, and it's a borderline disaster there at this point. Kentucky, meantime, needs to, in order to avoid a real slide here, needs to figure out a way shorthanded to beat Tennessee on Tuesday night to avoid going into this game losers of 3 in a row. And so, the temperature of the room could be affected a little bit by the state of optimism with Kentucky's fan base as it heads into this game, because if you lose the game against Tennessee, then suddenly it takes on even more urgency, in addition to just, the fact that Calipari is coming back to the building. This is the only time, by the way, these teams are meeting this season. Kentucky does not have to travel to Fayetteville, and they may well not wind up meeting in the SEC tournament. So this is the one and only meeting since Calipari left there. But I think it'll be more than a golf clap, but it won't be I don't think it'll be a standing ovation from everyone in the building, and they'll mostly treat him right. It's a fast Parrish. His time there is, I mean, you really could write a couple books about it in terms of how relevant he made Kentucky just about every month of every season for a variety of reasons. The amount of pros he brought in, the fact that he only walked away with 1 national title, which all things considered is a letdown for as hard as it is to win a national championship. The fact he only got 1. Now, he got close a few times. He had a team that got to the Final Four without a loss and then got knocked off by Wisconsin in 2015. So there's a lot of there. Beyond the crowd response, personally, I'm interested to see I know what Mark Pope's going to say. I can already picture the stuff he's going to say before and after the game, provided Kentucky fans don't go out of their minds and Pope feels a need to apologize on behalf of them. I'm more interested to see how open and emotions on his sleeve Calipari is heading in, or then even afterward, and what he gets there. Yeah, I agree with you. There's going to be a lot better games, but from a scene perspective, and just we gotta tune in and watch, see what happens here. That's the place to be on Saturday.
I think it's going to be more positive than negative, and I believe that it should be. I'm not a big believer in booing people who used to do great things for you, or hating them, unless, of course, the circumstances dictate it. Like Kevin Durant leaving Oklahoma City for Golden State. The first time he comes back to OKC as a visitor, if you want to let him have it, that makes sense to me. But this ain't that. John Calipari did not want to leave Kentucky. I know he voluntarily left, but he got nudged out the door. This was not his plan for the way his career would end. I promise you, he always imagined retiring at Kentucky and then being in Lexington ambassador for the school, living there, popping into games, basically being Mike Krzyzewski, being what Mike Krzyzewski is at Duke for Kentucky basketball. That's what he thought he was going to be. But it got so bad that awkward and uncomfortable that he decided it was best for his family and his career to get out of there. So he did.
It got toxic, Parrish. I mean, let's be honest. It got to a level of toxicity that I don't think he could bear it much anymore anyway.
That's right. But he didn't want this. And then I think the way both of these seasons have unfolded will play a role in the reception. If Arkansas was coming in here ranked 3rd in the country and Kentucky was sitting here on the wrong side of the bubble, then I think he'd get booed like crazy. But given that Arkansas is getting beat up every game and Kentucky is doing well under Mark Pope, and this is what Kentucky fans said they wanted. They got it. It's going well for you. It's not going well for him. And either way, this is a man who was, responsible for NCAA tournament losses to St. Peter's and Oakland. I got it. He did go to 4 Final Fours with your school. He did win a national championship for your school. Beyond that, over a span of 15 years, he gave you and your loved ones, if you're a Kentucky fan, some of the best memories, some of the best days and nights you've ever had from a sports perspective. I would imagine that would be worthy of a positive reception. How about this? If I were a Kentucky fan and my sons were with me at this game this weekend, I would tell them we're going to applaud John Calipari because, man, we didn't like everything. Certainly didn't like how bad it got at the end. But that guy, he did look up here in the arena. Look at these banners. That guy's responsible for some of these. We're gonna treat him as somebody who's responsible for some of these. I don't know if everybody in that arena feels that way, but I think most probably do. And I think that's probably more of what you'll hear than not. As always, we'll see. But yes, on Saturday, that's the place to be, the place to have your eyes and your ears. How will John Calipari get treated inside Rupp Arena? I'm certain we'll be talking about it on Sunday on the Eye on College Basketball podcast. When we come back, one last segment. Want to take a quick look at Tuesday night's schedule. We got a doubleheader on CBS Sports Network. I'll tell you what else is happening around the country. It's the Eye on College Basketball podcast. We're on CBS Sports Network. Welcome back to the Eye on College Basketball podcast on CBS Sports Network. Before we get out of here, I want to look ahead to Tuesday night's schedule. Like I told you earlier, we got a doubleheader on CBS Sports Network tonight. I'll be in studio. I'll put a tie on. I'll be in studio with Kiana Martin, Renee Montgomery, and Wally Zerbiak. 8 o'clock Eastern, VCU at St. Louis. 10 o'clock Eastern, Cincinnati at Utah. Elsewhere around the country, some notable games. Number 15, St. John's at Georgetown. Number 12, Kentucky at number 8, Tennessee. Wake Forest at number 21, Louisville. Oklahoma at number 13, Texas A&M. Norlander, what are you looking forward to tonight besides me, Kiana, Wally, and Renee?
I'm looking forward to seeing you guys on CBS Sports Network. I'll also be on CBS Sports HQ doing some recap stuff per usual on Tuesday night, so you can look out for that as well. There's a lot of stuff going on here. For the CBS Sports Network games, Cincinnati is in full-on panic mode. This team has gone from projected NCAA tournament team to being adrift at sea. Got to get that done on the road. And then VCU is really the the only potential at-large resume candidate. I'd advise it in winning that game to continue to strengthen and maybe ultimately help the A10 or VCU to not win not to win the A10 tournament to get the auto bid. Among the games you mentioned, St. John's 17-3 at Georgetown. If St. John's is going to really move into that spot of competing for, say, like a number 2 seed, got to win these kind of games. I think that's going to be really key down the stretch. So, heck, St. John's fans are thrilled that they're in this spot, period. So whether it's a number 2 or number 3 seed or number 4 seed, they're going to take regardless. But if you want to move up on the ladder, that's a pretty big game to not drop to bring your resume down just a little bit. Oklahoma at A&M. Both teams have taken on wins and losses as of late. A&M's the better team. I expect it to get the win. It's on its home floor. Kentucky, Tennessee, Kentucky doesn't have Lamont Butler available in the game, and then Andrew Carr is questionable. So shorthanded against the Vols, coming off the loss, obviously an extremely urgent game. I want to see how Kentucky responds in this kind of situation and see if it can keep it competitive. Tennessee obviously just lost a slugfest, combined 104 points against Auburn. Kentucky's going to want to try and crack at least 70 if it can. Keep an eye on that one as well. One game you didn't mention that has a lot of urgency to it is UNC at Pitt at 9 Eastern. Pittsburgh and UNC are both top 40 KenPom teams. UNC has the game against Duke looming on the road. So this is 2 road games for a UNC team that needed overtime at home to beat Boston College. The ACC is really flirting with 4-bid status, and the losing program here is going to be in a tight spot overall. So we do have a variety of intriguing matchups. Also, Wake Forest at Louisville in the ACC. I spoke with Pat Kelsey yesterday. Cardinals fans, if your team wins at home against Wake Forest tonight, the Louisville Cardinals will lead Wednesday's court report. A loss, and I might have to nudge that back just a little bit there, but also an urgent game for both of those teams because Wake Forest couldn't get it done against Duke, and now it has to go on the road and try and knock off a Louisville team that projects right now comfortably as an NCAA tournament squad.
Should be another fun night in the sport. 8 Eastern, VCU at St. Louis. 10 Eastern, Cincinnati at Utah. That's on CBS Sports Network, and then we'll have an episode of Inside College Basketball to recap the night. Shouts to Devin Downey. Shouts to Chester, South Carolina. Shouts to Perry Teagle, legend, Huck and Larnell. Thank you guys for watching the Eye on College Basketball podcast on CBS Sports Network. We'll be back next Tuesday, same time.